endure to the last days of Putin's life, if he is not removed from office beforehand. The war in Ukraine has started a new epoch in Russian history, a new chapter in which the exiles are an actor and possibly an author of the outcome. An important component of this optimistic claim is the pronounced generational character of the rebellion. I spoke with many young exiles who described themselves as in revolt from cowardly parents who failed to stand up against Russia's slide back into autocracy and imperial aggression under Putin. These were frequently bitter and painful clashes. The son who left home on his father's and mother's refusals to join him in speaking out publicly against the Ukraine invasion, even though his parents privately were against the war. The daughter who faced the wrath of her mother for participating in an anti-war street protest. Another daughter whose relations with her mother fractured when her mom declared her to be an enemy of the state. Sometimes, a grandparent was the issue, as for an exiled journalist who considered his grandfather a zombie creation of the Russia state's political propaganda, but who hoped to save his grandmother. Here, then, was a venerable Russian theme that harkened to Turgenev and his mid-19th century novel, Fathers and Sons. In the original Russian, Отцы и дети, which translates as fathers and children. His day is over. His song has been sung to extinction. Bazarov, the nihilistic medical student, says of his young friend's father, "We must clear the ground." In this framework, Putin, the prime target of today's revolt, could be thought of as a father figure. Russian society has deep and abiding patriarchal roots, a legacy of its Byzantine Orthodox culture, and in this cultural cosmos, the Czar-like Putin occupies a mythical status as head of the national household. But he turned 71 in 2023. What Putin's rebellious children have going for them is their years. They will outlive the father who has so roiled the Russian domicile. And as the savvy among them understand, the time to start clearing the ground is now. The work of patient preparation can be seen in the anti-Putin movement embodied by Alexi Navalny, 24 years younger than Putin and, from his prison cell in Russia, the inspiration for legions of committed young Russians in exile. The book's argument might sound like a paradox. One must leave the country to change it? Yet such has been the Russian experience. Whatever one thinks of the Russian Revolution, it was unimaginable without the organizing efforts of figures like Lenin and Trotsky in their long years of exile. Consider Lenin's arc. In 1897, at the age of 26, he was sentenced by the Tsar's court to, in effect, internal exile in Siberia, and 3 years later, with that time served, he departed for Western Europe. In 1902, he published his galvanizing pamphlet, What is to be Done, from abroad. The following year, he participated in congresses of exiled Russians in Brussels and London. 14 years went by before, in the spring of 1917, he departed his one-room apartment in Zurich, passed through Europe on a 2,000-mile journey on a sealed train, and arrived at the Finland station in the imperial capital of St. Petersburg to take charge of the Bolshevik insurrection and usher in the revolution. Then, too, there is the earlier example of Alexander Herzen. In Sergei Gureyev's vow to fix Russia, he sounded much like Herzen, the prototype of the Russian liberal reformer in exile from a century and a half before. Herzen fled the Russia of Tsar Nicholas I because his outspoken convictions, such as the imperative to abolish serfdom, pointed to a life spent in desolate prison camps. Nicholas I died in 1855, the war he was waging in Crimea headed for failure. His son, Alexander II, succeeded him at the age of 36, and the young new Tsar ended the war and embarked on systemic reforms, including the liberation of the serfs, aimed at modernizing Russia, just as